Okay, welcome back to By Grace Beauty. Welcome back. So here is part two. Part two. And can I just say, I am fighting back emotions like nobody's business. Like, my heart is palpitating. I can just feel water in my eyes. And I'm trying not to be a downer. But if I don't get this out, like, in the atmosphere, I'm always going to keep thinking, like, should I have told, should I have said it, should I have done it, and, okay, so, anyways, so my father had a stroke, and like I said, he had a lot of symptoms leading up to this. Even, like, I didn't talk about the leg cramps. He would have a lot of leg cramps. Poor circulation is one of the signs or symptoms leading up to stroke. And he would have a lot of leg cramps often. And he would drink water and Gatorade and try to stay hydrated, but it had nothing, it didn't seem like it had anything to do with hydration, but definitely the circulation. The day he had a stroke again, he had been in the hospital a few times with preliminary episodes, I call them. He would be revived and he would go home and he would say, don't take me because they're going to keep me 3 days, And so sometimes he would just say he wasn't going, And they would say it was up to him because evidently all his vital signs would, like, balance back out, and they would say if anything else happened, feel free to call them back. And so we went through that, and so this day it was kind of like snowing here. It was December 2017, and of course I was working from home. My dad was here, and I just remember it being very quiet. And he's a TV watcher. He really liked westerns and like the old shows. So Rifleman, Wagon Train, Bonanza, the Waltons. He was big on, he knew like all of he didn't like, what's the man's name? John Wayne that much. But he really watched the westerns and the old channels. And so it was probably about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. I just noticed that there was no TV on downstairs. I didn't hear any activity. And he had asked me, if he can have some eggs. And I was like, no, you probably shouldn't have any eggs. And at the time I was on keto, real strong on keto. And the internet doctor that he was kind of following was telling him to have 26 eggs a day. And I would tell him that was probably for somebody in great health, 20 or 30 years younger than him, right? And so, because I would eat eggs at that time, like I would like boil them, he felt, but I wouldn't overdo, like 2 eggs at a time, or I would have a boiled egg as a snack or something like that. I wasn't excessive when I was early in keto, because I wasn't sure. I believed in it, but I wasn't sure, because of my family having blood pressure problems and diabetes and cholesterol issues, and according to the what is it, the AMA, the American Medical Association, cholesterol is what causes stroke and heart attack and all this. And whereas when you're doing keto, the mindset has to be totally different. And I just didn't want to be the cause of anything detrimental happening to my father because he's trying to keep up with me and validate his choices or what people are telling him because of what I was doing. So I was like, no, you shouldn't have an egg, So he's like, okay, he agreed. He didn't have one of the eggs. And I kept working and still like very quiet downstairs. So I said, let me just go check on him. And okay, yeah. So I go downstairs, and he was at the kitchen table, and I could see he was eating like a chicken thigh. It was like a chicken there. And so, but he was slumped over. Okay. So, nervously, I can remember this clear as day. I said, Dad, you fell asleep at the table? And he didn't respond. So I said, Daddy, Dad, and I'm calling him, and he's not responding. And then I can see where fluids have been released from him. And so I right away go into like calling 911, and I'm trying to wake him up at the same time. Daddy, can you hear me? Can you respond? Because he's still breathing and everything. I can see his chest going up and down. And I'm calling 911, and I'm explaining, my father's not responsive. Yes, he is breathing. So on and so forth. Eventually he opened his eyes, but he wasn't speaking. So I'm like conveying all this information. And they're like, keep him up, try to keep him alert, keep talking to him, this and that. And so they come, and his blood pressure is really high. His blood pressure was really high, and so they're like, okay, we need to get him to the hospital. And I'm asking him, does he want to go? And in his eyes, you can see, like, I don't want to go, but he's not telling me, right? He's not communicating this. So I'm like, yeah, we're going to have to go. And my mom wasn't at home. So I'm trying to get her, and there was no answer. And I finally get her because she was in a meeting. And I'm telling her, I found Daddy, he was unresponsive. And so I'm going to go in an ambulance with him to the hospital. Well, they would not take him to the hospital he would normally go to because it would have been 2 exits further down the highway. Something has to be done about that law. That is insane. So we had to go to the first hospital, which wasn't a bad hospital. It just wasn't the right hospital in this case, okay? Because you need to be able to go to the hospital close to you in case of emergencies. But in his situation, all of his doctors were at the next hospital, all of his records, all of his everything. Plus, they specialize in stroke. The hospital they took him to specialized in heart. Okay, heart attack, stuff like that. Well, so that we get there, and I'm in the car, and they're still working, not the car, the ambulance, they're still working with him. And I'm like, Dad, are you okay? Can you hear anything? And he's not saying anything. And but his eyes, they're saying that his eyes are responsive. but they want to get the blood pressure down. They want to do this. They want to do that. And so, you know, I'm talking to him and I'm telling him, you know, we're gonna go, and I'm trying to get them to go to the next hospital. So, cause one of the paramedics was like, well, the family wants to take him out. Let's just take him out to the other, you know, hospital. And the other guy's like, no, no, no. We got to go to the first one. And I'm like, well, he needs to go to the hospital he goes to, you know. And so it was like all that in the ambulance. And it's snowing. And so then now I'm fearful because I don't want to make this decision. Go to the closest one, go to the furthest one. We're in the snow, you know. And then the guy goes, well, we need to go to the closest one because we don't want his condition to deteriorate. So, of course, that's putting the pressure on me. So, I said, okay, well, then we, you know, just go to the closest one. We go, and we're there, and they're doing all the workup and everything. And my mom and everybody, eventually they make it out there to the hospital, and they're asking questions, and they're asking to keep him for observations. And my mom's like, nope, we're going to take him out of here, and we'll take him to his hospital tomorrow. We'll take him out to his hospital tomorrow. And so I said, well, Mama, you know, to my mother, like, what about, and I regret this. I regret what I'm about to say. I said, what about them? What about, I don't know how I said it, but it was more or less, what about a second set of eyes? If these doctors they may have something different from what they have out at the other location. And the other location, they will work with him, but, you know, what can you do? If what's wrong with a second opinion and they have a second set of eyes? And she agreed, like, okay, then let's stay here, and they want to observe him overnight, and we'll see what happens. We'll check with his primary in the morning and things like that. Okay. So, of course, my dad, he is, at this point in his stage, he was on a walker, but he pretty much walked without the walker. He would put the walker up in the air and everything. And so we walked around the hospital. He was fine. He ate his dinner. He was fine. And so we stayed out there with him. I think my mom, I believe my mom stayed overnight. I believe that's what happened. And then the next morning, she was saying that he's not eating. Like, he's not eating. So I go out there, and they kept coming in. Can you move your arm? And he would move his arm. Can you move this arm? Move his arm. Can you move your foot? Can you move your leg? All right. But he's not really talking. You know what I mean? Just kind of like slurred, you know, really lethargic. And then they'll come back like a half an hour later. Can you move this arm? Well, this arm is moving just a little bit less now. And this arm is moving. This foot is moving a little bit less. And it's like basically my father had a stroke overnight in their care while they're observing him, okay? And I'm watching, like, the stroke happened, and all these things are slowly diminishing. Every time they come back in the room, he's getting less and less mobility. They're not doing nothing. and we left him in your care, what did you all do overnight? What did the nurses do? Now, along this 4-year stint, he was in the hospital several times, and I see what the nurses were doing. Like, I know what they were doing now. But then, if I would have known then what they do overnight, then we would have taken him home, because we would have had a more attentive eye and would have called the ambulance again, right? So throughout that day or two, it became that he couldn't swallow. Now, the night before, he ate his whole meal by himself, but little by little, he would be chewing, couldn't swallow. And it was like, Dad, you gotta swallow your food. And he would say, I can't. So then, of course, it became, well, the family can't feed him. The nurses or the speech therapist has to come in to feed him. Well, why? What happened? Evidently, the stroke attacked his throat muscles. His left side, he had left side deficit. And he had a little bit of a slack on his left side, but eventually that came back. But the throat, eventually he was not able to swallow. But then they started like giving him fluid by teaspoon. They gave it to him by IV, but then they were trying to get him like this nectar they would add to thicken it up, so that they can try some kind of swallowing to keep the muscles going. But that quickly diminished, where he was unable to eat pureed food. I mean, this is like in like a day and a half. He went from real food to pureed to nectar to nothing. Okay? And then they recommended this G-tube to put in his stomach so that he could eat. And then, it was everything was happening so fast. Like, what? So the doctors, they were supposed to put this tube in to make sure that he's able to eat, and then the nurses he went, how can I put it? He ended up in ICU because the fluid, the nectar, and everything that they were trying to give him by teaspoon was not swallowing. He was not capable of making it go down the track the way it should. So the fluid, this food, ended up in his lungs, so it caused a version of pneumonia. And I can't think of the term. Pneumonia. So he ended up in ICU twice before we can get out of the hospital because of this. His temperature went up to like 105 and it stayed there. They wouldn't give him anything to bring it down. It was just insane stuff. Like, he had a brain injury. When you have a stroke, it's a brain injury. So why would you allow a brain injured person to maintain a temperature of 105 degrees? It just was lunacy. We had to actually call a nurse that we know from our church to come out and put the pressure on to have him moved to ICU where he can get proper care. And so we did that, and then it was the nurse, we're waiting on them 2 days to come put this feeding tube in him. And then they're like, oh, well, the doctor said that the family didn't want that done. Like, what do you mean the family? Yeah, that's what the family said. So the doctor comes in and say, well, the family said, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm the family. My mother's the family. So who is the family that's telling you that we want my father to starve to death? I need to know who that person is. And he was like kind of snippy about it, right? And, well, that's what the nurse said. I said, well, I'm recommending that you bring the nurse in here along with yourself and talk to the family members that supposedly told you that we would prefer that my father not have a G-tube or any version of a feeding tube and let him go ahead and starve to death. I just want to know who those people are or who that person is. And he didn't want to do that. And I told him that I didn't appreciate his attitude. I'm going to ask him to correct his tone, because this man is not your father. He is your patient. You just met him yesterday. What I'm going to need you to do is put him on a roster to make sure he gets a feeding tube, because nobody in my family is telling you to allow him to die by starvation. And if that is your intent, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. So probably in like 30 minutes, maybe an hour, they came and got him and gave him a feeding tube where they put it down your mouth. And then they were like, well, he's not probably going to keep it in his mouth, because he was still kind of agitated from the stroke, and he wasn't really himself, and he was telling us dreams and hallucinations. We thought were hallucinations. We thought these were dreams. But later on we found out actually my father experienced, he had literally an experience overnight while he was having that stroke, an experience with Jesus. And that's another video. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And the more we see it, the more time went on, you knew this was a real thing. This wasn't just like, he couldn't have made this stuff up and keep repeating it coming out of a stroke, right? Where he wasn't really all there. And then as time went on, when I say time went on, I mean months down the road, when he was more level-headed. It took a long time to recover from that stroke. He was still able to say, yeah, this is what happened. These are some of the things that were said. This is how this looked. And I would kind of quiz him, and he was like, yeah. And when he would talk, it was almost like he was right there all over again. This was some real stuff. Beautiful, beautiful testimony. It was so beautiful, but that's to come. So yeah, so of course, yes, he pulled it out of his mouth. He didn't want it in, but the next morning he was scheduled for the G-tube. So he got the G-tube the next morning. Where am I? 23 minutes. And he was able to start to get feeding. The thing with the feeding, I got so much to tell you all, because my cousin talked to a nurse, and the nurse is the one that said, if he doesn't get a feeding tube, he's going to starve to death. Okay? Have some people around you that are in the medical field, that are in insurance, some people who are in home health care. Have some people around you that are aware of these things. Like, we just go through life, right? We just go through life just living. We don't ever think that we're going to need home health care, or we're going to have to question doctors, or we're going to question, like, what does the neurologist do? What does the nephrologist do? What does, I forget what the lung doctor is called. We need to, like, as you grow up, Learn what these people do. Oncology. Learn what these people do. If you are my age or younger, older, and you have some young people around you, make sure they know what these people do. Okay? They might want their job as a career. So, know what these people do. Even like the nurses' aides, the nurse practitioners, know what they're responsible for, and talk to your young people. Let them know that it's some careers out here that they should be considering, looking for, trying to aspire to. Okay, because they definitely have job security, and they definitely make really good money. Okay, so anyway, so my dad had, and I'm just gonna take this to 30 minutes. Okay, so he had the surgery done, and so now we're arguing with the doctor over what type of food he's going to get, because it's a liquid. And I'm telling him, because I think I'm early keto, right? I'm like, do not give him something with a lot of sugar in it. So we're at one hospital, which was, they give this feeding, okay? And I'm not going to give the brand and all that. But you can read the nutritional facts. And I'm telling him, my father do not need all this sugar. Do you have a diabetic version of this feeding so that it can be lower in sugar? Oh my God, he act like I was asking him to be crucified. That went on for like 2 days, like the back and forth, only to find out that they only had this version of a feeding, like a low sugar version of the feeding, at one of the inner city hospitals, their sister hospital. Like, can you ship it out here? No, we can't do that. Why not? Why not? What is that? Why not? It is. Are y'all sister company? Are y'all the same hospital? Okay. It was never ending. We weren't able to get it. So he developed diabetes. Dig that. So over time, and it wasn't long, I could just tell you so much. I can't tell you every little thing, but it would just take too much to give you everything. But over time, he developed diabetes when he went to rehab. He was in rehab for like 4 months. It took us a month to get out of that hospital because he kept going to ICU and back on the floor, to ICU and back on the floor. Some signs of new stroke, some signs we're not sure, we can't identify, we're not really sure what we're seeing. All of this stuff. Experimenting. You're not sure about stuff. You're misdiagnosing. You're hearing the nurse tell you one thing that she's saying, we're saying, but we're not saying. You just craziness. It's craziness. Stay on top of this stuff. Write stuff down. They would get mad every time they come in. We had a book. Blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, medication, whatever they did, whatever they put on the computer, great. We kept a log so that we will be able to see his temperature was this, his blood pressure was this. Okay, we don't have to ask you. They would get offended by that. Why are you always writing that down? Well, why not? Aren't you? Aren't you putting it in the system? So why can't we? I don't get it. What's the problem here? That's kind of comical, but it's serious. For real, this stuff happens. So it took us a month to get him out of that hospital into the rehab. And while he's in the rehab, he becomes unconscious again, right? Or unconscious after like 2.5 months there. So I say to them, they call us, please come out. I think my brother was there that day, and me and my mom, we were going to go to church. So here we go. We're going to go out. And I'm sitting there telling me his blood pressure is this, his heart rate is this, his temperature is this, blah, blah, blah. I said, have you checked his blood sugar? Oh, no, we don't have to do that. He's not a diabetic. That's not the protocol we follow for him. How about I'm telling him, you need to check that because you're giving him all this feeding that sugar, you know, and he doesn't need that. You need to check this stuff. So before we can get out there, the nurse is all like, yeah, we called 911 we took his blood sugar, and we only took it because we knew the paramedics would ask us anyway, and his blood sugar was 399. But when I asked you to take it 20 minutes ago, you didn't take it. But I think you did because I think you got scared. And they took him out to one of the better hospitals, the teaching hospitals. And out there, I was able to reason with the nutrition, what do you call those people? The nutritionist and the doctor to order him low sugar feeding. And they ordered it, they got it out there, and things totally improved for my father. And for the next 2.5 years to 3 years, maybe 2.5 years, 3 years-ish, he was on that low sugar feeding, no problems. Okay? But that's what we had to go through in order to get him on the proper feeding, and where he didn't have like diabetic issues. He had still developed was it level 2 or type 2 diabetes when they gave him this low dose medication. He wasn't on metformin yet, but they gave him some medication. It was a really low dose, and I'm not really sure what it was called. And eventually, as time went on, as the symptoms of the stroke progressed, within that last 9 months to the, that's when things started to get a little haywire. So we'll talk about that in the next one. But yeah, so he went to that rehab, and that was helpful. That was helpful. And okay, so again, I got a lot more. So let's start with that, and then I will go to the next stage. Okay, but I don't want to go too far past the rehab situation, because I do want to talk about rehabilitation. I want to talk about how that goes, or how it went for us. Okay, so I am breaking this up, and because the story is long, and I want to make sure that I'm telling the story and I'm not coming back. You know what I mean? Like when you come back to this kind of stuff, now you want to go further back and bring in more details. I'm trying to stay focused, and this is a long story, so bear with me. I hope this is helping somebody make some decisions, or be a little more concerned, or encouraging you to be stronger with how you interact with the medical providers, the care providers of your family member. Okay? Alrighty, so have a blessed day, and keep God first in your life, and I will be back with part 3